Hi, I'm Kirk Kernett.
And I'm Ashley Gordon.
And welcome to another episode of Reading for the Rest of Us,
the Grassroots Reading Talk Show.
This is episode 6.
6.
Already. Number
Half a
6.
dozen.
It's gone by quickly. We are going to do a different type of genre today, and this was your idea.
You looked really pained when you did that.
No,
no. God, we got to do this one.
No, I
sure
love
you're all right?
this. I'm perfectly fine and focused.
It is the 6th one after all.
But this one was your idea, your request, shall we say.
It was a request.
And tell us a little bit about what we're focusing on, but why you requested it.
Well, I had the brilliant idea of reading political novels in November. God help me, like I wasn't getting enough already, and was just exhausted. And with the thought of the holidays coming up, which is both exciting and exhausting at the same time, we need something happy. So we did memoir, but not like running with scissors.
Right.
This would be the international symbol for running with scissors. Not running with scissors memoir, not gosh darn my life was awful and look how I've survived, but just either happy people or funny people. So we did funny memoir.
Right. In particular, we're going to focus on books that are collections of essays.
Mostly, they turn out to be
humorous essays.
Yeah, personal essays.
But they're not. We're not talking about stand-up comedy books. That's become kind of a publishing trend in the last few years.
It has. So these are all actual writers who wrote memoirs that turned out to be funny, not funny people who wrote a book.
Right. They're autobiographical. They're usually by what we would think of as essayists, not necessarily newspaper columnists,
sometimes.
But some of them are. It's interesting if you look back to the history of the essay as a genre. We probably tend to think of it like we think of all literature as being so serious that it's can only stand to deal with deep subjects to be important. But there's always been a strain of humor throughout essay writing, all the way from the beginning.
Satire,
too. Yeah.
Yeah, they're often
and
using
parody.
these, making it seem like an autobiography where they're really making a point, or
and often,
there's an undercurrent to it.
Often making a mockery of whatever they're talking about. One of the, I didn't tell you this, but one of the books that
Last time you said that, the word porn came out.
Yeah,
so
well,
I really don't know where we're headed here.
I'm not saying the word that is in this title, but the readers are free to go look it up, and you can go look it up. But Ben Franklin actually wrote several funny essays, satire, and most of them were published anonymously in his life, but you can now go find them in collections. And the range of topics that Ben Franklin, our founding father, wrote upon are pretty amazing. It's almost like you start imagining that Ben Franklin had been in Harold and Kumar, go to White Castle or something. They get that sort of baudy and raunchy. So I just
tell
invite
that to your 17-year-old son, and you'll have a new appreciation for Ben Franklin.
I just invite the reader to go Google Ben Franklin essays and see what book title comes up, and don't blame me.
I think I'll do that.
There you go. There you go. Let's step back for a second and talk about this notion of humor versus seriousness, or tragedy versus comedy. Comedy gets a short shrift.
It does.
Why
When's
is that?
the last time that the Best Actor nomination or Best Picture went to a comedy?
That's right. Why is that?
It's a rhetorical question.
Why is that?
Why is that? You're asking me that because I grew up in the theater, right? And I should know this.
There you go. You should know this.
Well, I suppose it's because humor, because we're laughing, it isn't. You just assume it's not serious because it's laughter. But this is getting us, boy, I wish you'd asked me this beforehand, because I would have looked up Aristotle and the comedies and the tragedies, because he wrote on this very subject, which could take us back to Umberto Eco and The Name of the Rose, if we want to really go off into a segue. But that's what that book was all about, was because we lost the comedies, right?
Right.
Am I getting this right?
Yep.
Aristophanes wrote
all kinds of comedies.
Right. Okay. So that's as far as I can get.
Okay.
Now you go.
Well, I think there's definitely a bias that starts with the Greeks, and part of that is Aristotle's notion of.
So that's really where you wanted me to go?
Well, no, but
you
went there, so we'll go there. But the notion of Aristotle wrote a lot more about the effect that tragedy has on us
catharsis.
Emotionally. Exactly.
Okay.
And
I went to school.
He didn't.
Don't look so stunned.
I was not stunned.
Okay, sorry. So he wrote about
catharsis and the sort of emotional draining that a good tragedy is supposed to do for us. I don't think he ever really got into what comedy is supposed to do, or
but
sort
think
of the
about
correlation.
that. Okay, after a good cry, you know, you feel kind of purged and
Right.
exhausted.
Yeah.
Well, think about how you feel after a really good laugh
Yeah.
that makes you cry.
Exactly.
You laugh so hard you can't breathe, you're crying, and then you're just completely limp. That's
Yeah.
the best feeling in the world.
Right. I think there's a part of the bias, I think, reflects this idea that if you're light or humorous or even slapstick. I mean, I love slapstick.
Like Benny Hill?
Well, not that. I'm thinking more like Buster Keaton or Charlie Chaplin kind of stuff.
Okay.
But the idea is that if you are funny, you're somehow frivolous. And I think that's just a prejudice that has gotten kind of woven into the idea of what serious literature or serious reading or serious essays ought to be. So we want to
insert eye roll.
Right. We want to break that down a bit and talk about books that are funny, but also maybe
But are not the least bit frivolous.
Right. Exactly. So one of the first ones that you talked about, and you brought up a good word as we were sort of preparing for this. Tell us a little bit about the Haven Kimmel book that you love.
Okay.
And the word that you brought up was coping.
Right.
You said that humor essays are kind of a coping mechanism. What did you mean
for
by
both
that?
the writer and the reader.
Sure.
And we've talked on this subject before, and kind of the way we phrase it is, what book kept you afloat?
Mm-hmm.
You know, there are moments in life that are just more than you think you can handle, and sometimes it's a book that gets you through them. And it's one of the reasons why I read Pride and Prejudice. You know, depending on how many times a year I've read it, you can get a feeling for how that year went. So when we talked about doing funny memoirs, this is the first book that came to mind, because when I read it, I laughed hysterically through the whole book, and I thought, I got to do it again. So my second child, God bless his soul, didn't sleep for almost 2 years, really, but for the first few months of his life, the only way he would sleep was if I was sort of at a 45-degree angle, and he was right here. So it's really difficult to sleep like this with the kid right there.
Yeah.
But I'm the mom, so I did it, and God love him. So the way I survived for the first several months of his life was either watching the Eukanuba dog trials, which are great at 2 o'clock in the morning because they're interesting and, you know, you can kind of fade in and out. Or I was so blessed, I'm pretty sure it was either Eleanor or Cheryl at Capital Book that got me reading this book. And I won't move it all over the place like I did last episode. This is Haven Kimmel and a girl named Zippy. And so it's short essays, and I read it while I was delirious from lack of sleep. And it was so incredibly funny, and I remember just collapsing with laughter. So I reread it, and I don't know if it's the 8 years that have ensued, you know, go from 34 to 42, and 42 life looks different, and they were still funny.
Yeah.
They were very funny and very perceptive, and much of it takes place when she's somewhere between kind of 5 and 4th grade, and it's her life in Moreland, Indiana, which she says has 300 people, and it's like a static number. It never gets any bigger or lower.
She's kind of a fish out of water in this community.
And she's a fish out of water in any community.
Right.
God bless her. And it's funny, but you see some of the difficulties behind it. You know, when she's talking about the crazy old lady with all the cats, well, if you just read it on the surface, it's funny, but if you start thinking about how clearly this woman had you know, emotional issues, and how she copes with her older brother and older sister. And so I think for the reader, you're coping because that book is getting you through. And sometimes, particularly with memoir, Anna Quindlen has a wonderful passage where she talks about memoir being an opportunity for you to see that, as she says, the cul-de-sacs of life that you get yourself into, you're not alone.
Yeah.
And some of the crazy family ones, you go, oh wow, your family's even crazier than mine, and how reassuring is that?
Right.
So you're coping as you read because it's getting you through this tough time, but I think the author's coping by taking painful times in their own lives and finding the humor in them,
right,
and then sharing it.
Yeah. I think that's a great description of it, and I think that the coping is exactly right, that the humor it sort of puts things in perspective, and yet it allows us, again, it's not the type of humor that comes off as juvenile or silly.
No, not at
which
all.
has its own purposes, but it's
well, it must, or there wouldn't be movies like Dumb and Dumber,
right,
which guys watch over and over and over, and even find ways to discuss, which I find fascinating.
Well, and but I think the kind of one of the words that we were batting back and forth was this idea of poignancy, and how you can be serious and still be funny, but the humor sort of brings out the sadness in it.
There was sadness underlying almost all of the humor. And I know there's a comedian who said that. Somebody else said that, and I can't think. We'll Google that one too.
Yeah.
So one of the...
Let's jump to one of the things you
go.
said, because I thought you made a great point there, was when she's talking about the woman who clearly is unstable or has emotional issues. Yeah. You know, if we were going to talk about what is one characteristic of a book that a humor essay that allows the reader to sort of enter it and identify with it, I think usually the quality that writing teachers focus on for this type of reading is self-deprecation. You are making fun of yourself, because if you don't make fun of yourself, you're making fun of other people.
And that just comes off as mean.
Yeah, it gets tiresome, and it gets sort of.
Yes, she's definitely
brutal.
Making fun of herself as much as anybody else.
There's very few of these books that I think that really have wide appeal that aren't self-deprecating more than they are brutal on other people. I will say there's one example, and we tend to emphasize the positive here. We sort of made a rule when we started doing this show that we weren't going to...
we don't want to bash anybody.
But I'm going to bash somebody, because I really do hate this book, and I hate sort of everything that this writer stands for.
Gosh.
There's a guy named Tucker Max who wrote a book called I Hope They Serve Beer in Hell, and had a follow-up book.
And what an uplifting title,
yeah,
just
exactly.
Right off the bat.
But, you know, it's essays about what a jerk he is, and you know, those can have that sort of self-deprecating feel, but a lot of the humor is really done at the expense of other people, and it comes off as, it's sold 500,000 copies, so it's a very popular book. It's kind of considered a bathroom read, which I guess is kind of where it belongs, but might be an insult to bathrooms. But, you know, I think that it really is cruel kind of comedy. You know, it sort of reminds me of that Jack Black movie about where he falls in love with the obese woman, and that's such a painful movie to sit through, because it's mocking so many sort of.
Well, now one of the ones I read gets close to that.
Oh, okay. Well,
but
which one was
he
that?
makes fun of himself too.
Okay.
And we talked about this, the David Sedaris.
Oh yeah.
Now, he's incredibly witty,
right,
and very, very funny. And a lot of people have read or might have heard of Me Talk Pretty One Day. This may be the breakout. Is this the biggest one?
Well, I think that was. I'm not sure.
The crossover hits.
Yeah.
Could that be it?
That was a huge one.
And then he's got others: Dress Your Family in Corduroy and Denim. The one I read, since it is December.
Yeah.
That was fun. I actually have been listening to this one, and he travels around, and he doesn't really do stand-up, but he sort of tells his essays, reads his essays.
Right.
So he reads the audio for Holidays on Ice, and this grew out of a series of essays he wrote about being an elf for Macy's Santa, and they are truly hilarious. And he does make fun of himself.
Oh, yeah.
But the thing is, nobody is safe, and he does some satire that I'm running along and I'm listening to it and I'm kind of cringing, much like you were saying.
Wince-inducing.
Yeah, some of it is I guess it's fair game because he also makes fun of himself in it, but
Yeah.
some of it's kind of horrible.
We're putting up here a lot of the different book covers, the different versions of from Holidays on Ice, which is where that is collected. You know, I remember when the Santa Diaries, which is kind of the breakthrough one that got him the book deals, first appeared on NPR. It's been about 20 years ago, and it was so bizarre to hear that type of humor on because let's face it, National Public Radio is, you know, has a reputation
Dodgy?
for being earnest to the point of
earnest. There we go.
Earnest to the point of stodginess.
Yeah, he's beyond irreverent.
Yeah, and he just came in there, and you know, I remember people talking about, the usual NPR crowd talking about it afterwards, and just dying almost against their will, dying of laughter. Because
these were maybe the real driveway moments.
Right, right.
You wouldn't turn off the car and go inside in the middle of his talking about the long line of children waiting to see Santa at Macy's.
And
it's hilarious.
Honestly, it was such a relief from sort of hearing another interview with Ken Burns or somebody like that, who, great people, very talented artist, but you know, after a while, you do want somebody to come in and just
shake things up,
cut up a little bit,
and they're fun, and
right.
And so for some of the essays that were the cringe-inducing, I just skipped those, and I went on to one that was a little nicer and a little funnier.
Well, I think he can get away with it for a couple different reasons. First off, my perception is he's always. However mean he is to other people, he always makes a point to be far meaner to himself, and point out his own flaws. And I think that's really what's missing out of somebody like a Tucker Max, who's, you know, the humor just comes across as sort of fratty and belligerent, and it doesn't. You know, I would love to be at a dinner table with David Sedaris, because I think you have a sense.
Oh, he's definitely on the list of
yes.
Who would you like to have over for dinner?
You know,
he's so entertaining.
He kind of reminds me of Truman Capote in that sense, that you would sit there and imagine that
strange voice.
That he is just you know, a very funny storyteller, whereas being in a room with Tucker Max would.
Okay, enough about Tucker Max.
Okay.
Tell us about a book you like.
Well, we were a couple ones that I really liked. About 4 years ago, there was a book of essays that came out, and it really sort of created a genre. It was Sloane Crosely's "I Was Told There'd Be Cake," which let me pull up that book cover real quick. But these were essays.
Where is she?
That there we go. I was told there'd be cake. These are essays that I think in terms of the content are not necessarily mind-blowing. These tend to be about young women's life, single life, the things they have in their apartment, sort of the things they go through in New York City.
Kind of like the new show on HBO?
Well, that show,
Girls?
That show's a little harsher than I think what these essays are. These are I'd say they're safe essays, but they're gentle essays, and they are making fun of the things in women's life, family relationships. But what I find intriguing about this book is it was a huge success, bestseller, and she had a follow-up called "How'd You Get This Number," which is a little bit of a sadder topic. These tend to be sort of lighter or frivolous. It's almost modern, kind of a Sex and the City Irma Bombeck, if you can imagine that kind of combination. But I think what was neat about it was it opened up a door for a lot of women writers to come in with books of essays along these lines. And so now if you go to Amazon and look this up, and you know how Amazon always gives you a list of books comparable.
If you like this one, you might also
you would like this. And it's amazing to just sort of scroll through how many books in the last 4 years by 20, 30, early 40-something-year-old female writers talking about their experiences.
So does this qualify as chick lit? We've
No,
talked about this before.
no,
So it's not chick
no.
lit. So we sometimes talk about the gender issues.
It's more urbane, and she has a huge male following.
Why?
I think
the whole time you're describing it, I'm thinking, why are you reading this book?
Well, I was kind of curious about how, what the appeal was and what the attraction is. I think it's partly a generational thing. I think it's a voice that sort of came through and was sort of addressing experiences of what it was like to be, you know, in your 30s in New York. But I also think that there is a sort of smart, urban, sophisticated type of humor that is PG. That it's not...
which sometimes is just a relief.
Kind of a relief, yeah. You know, the Girls on HBO, that's a great show, but that's very much an R-rated sort of adult show, and the type of comedy in it is so aggressive, sort of in your face, make you squirm.
Aggressive, that's
yeah.
the word. And sometimes you just feel exhausted with it.
Right,
that was one of the
right.
things about all of the books that I ended up reading, many of them rereading. They're not aggressive. They and particularly with that self-deprecation, like you talked about, Anne Lamott being the queen of self-deprecation, reading Operating Instructions, her book about her first year with her son and what a complete mess she was. But then she's got so many others, Bird by Bird, and then an entire series. She just has a new one about prayer, and it's Help, Wow, Thanks.
Yeah.
So she has a wonderfully wry take on life, mostly about how she kind of glumps along and this is how she got through.
Her type of stuff to me, and I think Bryson falls in this category a little bit, is, you know, you think of David Sedaris as being very arch and very pointed and very much going for the jugular.
And
with
every
the jokes.
Single word with him is precision writing.
Right. It sort of borders almost on the line of satire or parody.
It does. And you read Sedaris a lot of times and think, there's no way.
Yeah.
There's absolutely no way this really happened.
Yeah.
Where with Anne Lamott, you think, oh God, I'm so sorry this really happened. Because she writes with such complete transparency and just opens herself up to, I did this ridiculous thing. And she's laughing about herself and inviting you to laugh with her. So with her, I don't question at all whether or not it happened. Because a lot of times when you read nonfiction, you get a feeling that it was slightly manipulated for the camera kind of thing.
In fact, that is an issue of controversy that, you know, the real, you know, the sort of the pedantic types come along and Sedaris has been accused of making stuff up, and I think at this point...
but you kind of know he's making stuff up,
I think at this
and it's
point,
okay.
It's kind of like an oral storytelling where you have the fish was this big, and, you know, that's part of the enjoyment of it.
It's not a news article.
Is the breadth of it. Let's go back to this idea of, you use the word dry sense of humor. Tell us a little bit about what that means and what's the appeal of that.
So that's more Bill Bryson.
Right.
So where we have Zippy and her quirky family, and Sedaris and Anne Lamott, where unconventional and sometimes dysfunctional. Bill Bryson, he does memoir, of course. One of the ones that's really about him, The Life and Times of the Thunderbolt Kid, a memoir, is probably the one that I've read that's most about him. This is one I was reading on a plane one time, and I was laughing so hard. I was trying really hard not to disturb everybody.
Stewardess told you they'd
I was
make you
really
get out of the
kind of
plane
afraid
if you
they
didn't
were
settle
going to,
down.
like, you know, tap me on the shoulder. Because I'm keeping it to myself. So this one was a laugh out loud book and still is. And then the other one is new book, and this one I think comes out in paperback soon because this came out. This was a Christmas gift, thank you, Mom, from last year, At Home. And he's amazing in that he's taking what seems like an incredibly mundane topic, which is the history of the house. Like, there's a section on pantries. And yet he's incredibly erudite and well-educated and informed and articulate. And so he takes these things and also weaves in these funny stories, some of which are about him. Probably the book that most people know is A Walk in the Woods, which really was, he's making fun of himself.
That's the one we have up on the screen
here.
Okay,
there. Yeah. This one was also laugh out loud, funny, and he's making fun of himself and his overweight buddy who walks the Appalachian Trail with him. But he also talks about, and I still remember this years later, the diseases that are killing off the dogwood trees. He works in an incredible amount of knowledge, and I think it's because it's that dry humor. There's no neuroses anywhere. It's just sharp, witty and self-deprecating, but you know, he's okay.
Yeah.
You know, we don't worry about him.
Yeah.
But he's not zinging anybody. He's not zinging himself, really.
Right.
He's a good storyteller. You'd also want to have him at dinner. He's on the list.
Just to talk a little bit about a different type of comedy, you know, we've gone through the sort of the barbed and then the lighter or the drier. Talk about the absurd and sort of the sort of bizarre. People who know me know I'm a huge Gertrude Stein fan, and I don't think that people necessarily think of Gertrude Stein and think of humor. But she actually was, and she wrote her at least 2 of the 3 autobiographies that she wrote are very, very funny. And my favorite that I wanted to talk just briefly about is this book that we have up here called Everybody's Autobiography, which was the story of in 1934 and 35 when, after 30 years of living abroad, she and Alice B. Toklas came to tour America. And so you have these 2 late 60s, women in their late 60s, a gay couple, you know, under the guise of one being a famous writer and the other being a quote-unquote secretary, being shuttled all around America to give these, I think what most people would think of as just absolutely indecipherable speeches about Gertrude Stein's aesthetics. And I think she was wonderfully smart about understanding that people thought she was kind of a traveling carnival show, and she knew how to sort of manipulate situations by playing naive. And so
she goes in knowing she's the joke.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
so she becomes
exactly.
the joke.
That's the perfect way to put it. She goes in knowing she's the joke, and she lets the joke be on her over and over again, but without,
it takes the sting out.
Right, without sort of ceding the point that she isn't, you know, sort of a BS artist or whatever they would have called her in that day. But it's a lot of fun, and you know, she ends up in Hollywood, and you know, Dashiell Hammett's there, and they're, you know, they go through all these things about her meeting movie stars and, you know, how sort of impressed she is by their glamour, and then she meets the real people sort of behind the glamour, and it's a very clever, very clever book in the way that it presents itself. The other type of comedy that we really haven't talked about, and we're running out of time, so we're just going to mention it here real quick, but we should bring up parody. And I threw this book out to talk about it, and Ashley started laughing at me again. But you know, one of the first parody books, modern parody books, was by James Thurber and E.B. White, called "Is Sex Necessary?"
To which we say,
yeah,
better not be.
Yeah, but
Hope not.
But this is a great parody of love manuals back in the day. So we recommend.
This is what we're ending on?
This is what we're ending on.
Oh,
yeah.
Great.
And we're gonna go smoke a cigarette right now.
Hey, I could throw in another one really quick.
Okay.
Just a thing. Naked Babies.
There you go.
You know, that's a segue. Anna
that's
Quindlen, she was the other one. She's got a new memoir out recently. Lots of candles, plenty of cake. It's very insightful and enjoyable. But you know, if you just need the pictures, then go get her Naked Babies.
Right.
They're adorable.
Well, as we always say, when we run out of time, we could have talked about so much more. But we've enjoyed it very much, and
this was happy.
Enjoy a good book. Thank you.
Thanks.